Alright, today we'll be going over the basics of supply and demand. So when talking about supply, the basic definition of supply is the amount of a resource that producers have available for consumers to buy. The law of supply states that when prices are high, essentially supply is high, or when the price goes up, supply will go up. On the other hand, demand is the consumer willingness to buy such products. And the law of demand states that when prices go up, demand goes down. So it's essentially inversely related. Schedules and graphs can be used by economists to compare supply and demand. You could have a supply schedule, and any given schedule would actually have price on it. And for a supply schedule, it would have quantity supplied. So for, say, milk, a producer could sell it for $3, and if it sold for $3, they would make 50 gallons. That's just an example. And then for, let's see, a demand schedule, the price might be set at, $2 for a gallon of milk. And if it was set at $2 for a gallon of milk, people would probably buy 100 of them. So that's just one example of how a schedule can be used. You can actually use schedules to graph points onto a graph and then directly compare supply and demand on the same graph. And I'll show you how to do that. So when you're graphing out supply and demand to compare, this is kind of how you'd start off. Let's see, this is how you'd start off. The y-axis will represent price, and I'm going to put a P. And the x-axis will represent quantity. If you'll remember, the law of supply states that supply will go up when the price goes up. This means that supply is actually positively correlated with price, and so that'll result in a positive slope. So this right here is supply. This is just like a general rule of thumb. Obviously, if you were using a schedule to graph, you wouldn't necessarily need to memorize this or remember this, but it's an interesting trend that you'll see in basically all instances when you're comparing supply and demand. When you're graphing it out, supply will be positive. On the other hand, demand will be negative. Because if you'll remember in the law of demand, I'll put it right there, I guess, demand will go down as price goes up. So it's negatively correlated. And so we'll have our demand curve right there, D for demand. And again, I'm not basing this on any particular schedule. This is just a general trend that you'll see. I'll erase that, give me some more space. A very interesting point on this graph, I will point it out, is right here in the middle, right where supply meets demand. This is known as equilibrium. I'll label it with an E for equilibrium. This is an ideal situation for a very specific reason, and that is because we'll use an example for this. If this were milk, we'll just say that the equilibrium price is $3 at such and such amount. So the equilibrium price is $3 for milk. If it were $4, this would hit somewhere along this part of the graph. So it would be above equilibrium. If it were $2, it would hit below at this point in the graph. Would be below equilibrium. This space right here, above equilibrium, is known as surplus. There is too much supply and not enough demand. And this area right here is called shortage. There's too much demand and not enough supply. Shortage. So again, I say ideal price generally because it means that there's not a surplus and there's also not a shortage. There's just perfectly equal. I had a great time making this video. Thanks for watching.